So what are the odds that your lakefront dreams just totally dry up and go away when the water level in the lake drops? Well, we're going to talk about that. So as I'm filming this, it's May of 2026. Central Florida is in a dry spell that's probably one of the worst we've had in about 20 plus years. So I thought this was a great opportunity to let's talk about lake levels and how the water levels fluctuate on the lakes and what it can mean to you as a property owner who has bought into this piece of real estate for the lifestyle. And the lifestyle is impacted when the water levels fluctuate, and they always do, and sometimes it's more extreme than others, and we're going to talk about it. Try to give you background here on some stuff I love to talk about. So we are on the shore of Little Lake Fairview. I know this lake fairly well. I've lived here for 10 years, and right now the water level is extremely low. And I want to talk about how it has fluctuated over the time I've owned it, the history of Central Florida water level fluctuations here, and hopefully give you a little bit of a better understanding because it's really an intriguing topic. So I'm going down here to the shoreline, and right now our water level is right here. We are about 25 inches vertically, so about right here, approximately below what is called the normal high water line. The normal high water line is a really important metric that is assigned to all the lakes in the state of Florida, where the water management districts say we're going to establish the normal high water line as the spot, the threshold. That's where all the setbacks start from. That's where the dock heights are determined from, and it's really an important factor. In my lake, the normal high water line typically is about right where I'm standing here. I'll show you on the dock on another shot here. But that's the number that, or the location that is used to determine how far back the house needs to be, how far back a pool needs to be, how far out the dock can extend. So it's really an important number, and it's also a reference point. That doesn't mean it's where the water typically sits, so to speak, but it's kind of the elevation that the water management district has established for this particular lake. You go to another lake, you might have a different normal high water line. Here on Little Lake Fairview, I think it's 87.5 feet, and that's an elevation above sea level. Now, something that comes up a lot of times on waterfront properties is the lot size, and where does your property actually extend to? And that's another interesting question because it can really vary from one lake to the next. You'll find that most of our lakes here in Central Florida, if you look at the surveys, and they will typically extend out into the water. So legally, I own a piece of land that goes out pretty much to the center of the cove here. And that's my shows that I think 0.9 acres. That's another thing that comes up a lot of times. My actual high and dry acreage is considerably less than that. Okay, so, but have to use there's permits and allowances for different types of property that are based on the lot size. I'm right under an acre land, and so that might impact what I can do with my property up there, even though a lot of that land is typically under the water. Now, what do I actually own? Legally, technically, I do own going out into the lake, but in the state of Florida, that's the lake considered a sovereign body of water. So I own the dirt in theory. I just don't really have any rights to it. I have to, allow them to come out and they can fish. People to kind of access because it is a sovereign body of water is what they call it. But the property going out into it. But if I want to do anything to it, like put in a structure, a dock or anything like that, I've got to file with the authority. In this case, it's Orange County. And get on what I'm going to do to my property that is technically owns it. So that's how that works. Now, as the water level drops, and right now we're out here. Yes, in theory, my high and dry property has again, that normal high water line that we talked about is what they're going to use to determine what I can actually do with the property as far as setbacks on structures, extension out the water with the dock and that kind of stuff. So something to keep in mind when you're at these types of properties. Now, I say that most lake properties do extend out into the water. You will find some where there's actually legal descriptions. The house I grew up in over in the Tampa area, that legal description actually says down to the water line. Okay, when you go in there and read deed and the description on the, that can create some legal confusion, obviously, because the water line fluctuates. And that's, again, where that normal high water line has come into play. Decades of kind of using it to establish what somebody's property rights are as far as construction, what they can do to the property. When you're looking at waterfront properties, understanding whether or not you actually have littoral waterfront rights that extend down into the water, there's my property I'm selling right now that has a gorgeous view out over a small lake out back, but the association actually, that chunk of water and the property owner's property line stops before it gets down to the water. So understand the difference between, do you have true water frontage? Is it just a water view? Is it, accessible? Stuff, it all factors into when you're looking at waterfront properties and really trying to understand, what it's so let's talk about docks a little bit. So when I bought this house, there was already a dock in place. And if I was building a new dock where there wasn't one, or if I was doing a significant amount of work to this dock, I would have had to gone in and applied for a dock permit. I would have had to involve Orange County. I had to involve the environmental protection. I think it's Department of Environmental Protection, we call it now. And in this cases have to involve the water management district. Now the municipality try to set their building and zoning requirements to match up with what's going on in the water management district. But sometimes you have certain cases where you've got to you have to get a variance or something like that. In my case here, I expanded the dock at one point, went out a little bit further, and I started into my setback from my property, my neighbor over here. That's a property line over there. And so in that case, I actually had to consult with the neighbor, get him to sign off on giving me a variance, because I'm sitting inside his setbacks a little bit, which I think in this case was like 11 feet or 15 feet, something like that. So there's definitely rules at play. The other thing that's worth about is dock length and dock footprint. Now, how big of a dock you can put up on a lake. Most municipalities in Central Florida, they'll give you 1,000 square feet. There is some fluctuation on that based on the length of shoreline you have. So if you have a lot more shoreline, sometimes there's some rules that you can make your dock a little bit larger. If you have a very narrow shoreline, a little pie-shaped piece of property with maybe just a point down the water, they're not going to let you go out there and build a massive bit that sits over your property, your neighbors. So there's there. Let's talk about this a little bit too. This dock here, when I was rebuilding it, I had one of the things I considered was pushing it out further. Here in Orange County, I can go 60 feet out from the normal high water line as far as dock extension. I didn't really want a longer dock. I've got plenty of depth out here in this lake. This lake is off fairly quickly once you get out there a little bit. So I didn't really need the depth, and I didn't want dock to obstruct my view from the lake. But what it did drive me to do was make sure that I have a boat lift and a boathouse scenario that allows me to get my boat up and down, independent of the water level's doing. Right now we're at levels we haven't seen in 20 plus years, and my dock the water come back down, my dock is about as dry as I've seen it get. I've still got enough water under there to get that boat down, but when I bought the boat and I knew the type of boat I wanted, I got a nautique boat that actually has eye hooks on it, so that I did not have to use a type lift to put the boat on top of, because if I have a cradle lift, I need that additional, probably inches below the lower it down in the water so I can get it off. And right now, if I had a cradle lift, I'd have a hard time getting that boat off, quite frankly. So these are kind of some one to take into consideration. Okay, let's talk white sandy beaches. So right now, I have the benefit of having low water, and it's showing off a lot more white sand than you would typically see. The water's up to a normal level. We've talked about some of the different lakes have different bottom characteristics. This lake happens to have a very white sandy bottom for the most part. When I bought it, this place had been in the same family for 40 plus years. It was an elderly family that lived here, and the lake had not been cleaned and maintained in decades. And I literally had probably about, I would say, a good 12 plus inches of muck from old organic matter that had either floated up, fallen off of the trees and whatnot, had not been maintained. You walk out there and your feet would actually sink about 12 feet in muck. And it was one of my first pursuits was to get that muck cleaned up. It was a lot of work. And there's companies that do that work for you. I now have a company that comes out, a contractor that maintains my waterfront. We are looking at it right now. We're due for a cleanup. I think they're coming out sometime this week, but I wanted to show you what it looks like right now. If you don't maintain these waterfronts, don't stay, pristine beaches like a lot of people are looking for. And so this is representative of what this can look like. And this is just stuff that floats, you can float up, and some lily and stuff like that. And it's just part of living on the lake. And once my crew comes in and cleans up, it looks nice. It's raked. They get all the other weeds out of the water that float up. I have them maintain a certain kind of buffer zone that I've established where I want to have a sandy bottom in some areas, but not across the entire shoreline. And you will see some properties where it has come in and really it's not, and they'll remove every bit of vegetation along the shoreline because they want that white sandy beach. And you can some really hefty fines. And I've some clients actually, the DEP, Google aerial come in and say, hey, here's what it looked like last year, and now everything's gone. They want that vegetation. It's important for erosion. It's important for the aquatic life. It's where the fish, ducks, all that kind of stuff. So you are allowed on almost all lakes to clear a certain swath, and it's usually based on the percentage, overall percentage of your, I think 30% if I recall, if you want to have a white sand beach. When I first bought this, what I did was I came in here, and I had my kids at the time, and I cut out a small area here, and basically the sod and they had grown in, and I had a very nice white sandy beach. That was perfectly fine for our uses. And what you're seeing here, this is because we have low water, why you're seeing more beach. That's, I know for a lot of people, they want to have that white sandy beach. You be careful and do it within reason, because maintaining these absolutely critical to the health of the lake. So what are some effective buyer and seller strategies when we have low water like this? Well, first of all, if you're a buyer, don't be afraid to be out there looking at waterfront property and potentially making a purchase right now. It can honestly be one of the better times to really understand what you're buying into. And there's enough data out there, and fortunately, local experts, I know one, who know the historic of these different lakes are. Some of them behave very differently. There are some lakes that, because they're very shallow lakes, and we have this type of water shortage having right now, you're going to have entire docks exposed out of the water because a little change in the vertical height of the lake extends the shoreline out, hundreds. Most of our lakes are not like that, but it's worth doing your research and knowing. And when you're out looking at waterfront property during periods of low water like this, it's a great time to really understand, okay, how's this behave? Are you in a chain of lakes? Do you want to have canal access to get to the other lakes? Will that be impeded when you have low water level? How often does that happen? These are all things that are great things to understand as a buyer and to when you're buying your property. If you're a seller, sorry, that's Cody, my assistant, he drank some water. If you're a seller, then just like else, we disclose. Water is a normal part of living on the water. Most people get that, most buyers get that. And it can be a great time to kind of show this is the worst case scenario. This is what you can anticipate, and it makes for a very smooth sale that way. It makes for a very smooth sale. Something else that's advantageous when we have a low water level, it's a great time to do a better, more thorough on your docks and your waterfront structures like a seawall. So we're going to do a video on seawalls, because docks and walls often go somewhat overlooked during the due diligence process on purchase, in my experience. And it's a legitimate structure. A new dock these days is easily, you can spend, it's hard to put in a new dock for much less than $50,000. You're probably getting close to six figures. Seawalls, that's a whole nother, I said, but some seawalls can be extremely expensive, usually start at, six more. The reality of it is we don't see a whole lot of seawalls here in Central Florida. I would maybe 15% of the properties, if I had to guess, actually require seawalls, because we do typically have a gradual slope going down to the waterfront, and you don't have these big drop-offs and major erosion issues and that kind of thing. So something else I want to talk about in this video is what are some of the worst case scenarios as far as water levels on when we have significant. Back in 2022, I believe it was, Hurricane Ian came through Central Florida. Was a 500-year flood event. We had massive amounts of rain. The hurricane over just kind of parked Florida. And that was a pretty hairy event because, I went through the storm, and because the on this dock actually came up to about right here. And you can see that right now it's probably close to 5 feet, 5.5 feet lower than that. So we literally had, and before the storm got here, the day before I came out and our water level was about here, we had almost a 48-inch vertical rise in the water level of this lake. That's not 48 inches of rain. What that is 48 inches of water. I had close to 20 inches of rain during the entire event, but most of that was from massive torrential downpours. And because these lakes act as drainage basins, and these water from the surrounding areas piled into the lake, the roads into the lakes in most cases. And so you have a storm that can cause a much larger vertical rise in the water. Now, I'm in flood zone X. I didn't by flood, it did go way up into the yard. I think I'll find some pictures and put in this video so you can see it, because it was really kind of crazy. But water level came up, and what part of the way our lake, our water management is structured here in Central Florida is these water management districts have, these lakes are connected by canals or underground, and they have flood control weirs that the water management district maintains to try to maintain a predictable level of water in these lakes. And they will actually draw them down before the summer gets here, anticipating rains, so they'll have more room to come up. When we do have a big event, they'll open the floodgates to let the waters down lower again, but that takes time. And I know when we had Hurricane Ian, it took, gosh, I think it was weeks until we got back down to a normal water level. And some properties that flood. That's when flood insurance, flood zones, all that kind of stuff starts to come into play. So and that was a once 100-year event. But and that's where you understand again how your lake behaves. Something else I want to mention: the different lakes and the hydrology of the lakes causes them to behave differently. So you have some lakes because, and it gets pretty scientific, I know, enough to be dangerous, but you've got some lakes because they may have more of a sandy bottom, a more porous bottom structure. The water level drains down into the aquifer much faster, at a faster rate, and that also makes them more where the water the levels are, because ultimately that's what maintains the water levels of most of our Florida lakes. You'll say they're spring fed but it's rare to find a Florida lake that actually has a big gaping hole that's tied down into a natural spring. Heavy rainfall here, I can actually see some little springs out in the lake there that bubble up water that's pushing up from the aquifer. But most of these, the water level height and where we are right now is because our aquifer is lower, because we've not had a normal amount of rainfall. You go to another lake and it might have more of a clay, silty type that does not allow water to leach down into the aquifer down below as fast, and so that lake may behave differently in terms of water level fluctuation. If you like these videos, please like and subscribe down below. I'm putting content out all the time, and if you're considering buying or selling waterfront, or you just want to understand more about how our lakes work here in Central Florida, follow us on this here, and we'll keep the content coming, and let us know in comments down below what kind of stuff you'd like us to be talking about. I'm Mike Derenthal. Thanks for checking us out.